with his third straight fight of the night, including the 2024 Match of the Year against Daniel Zellhuber. Esteban Ribovics has put himself in the conversation for the most exciting fighter in the UFC. His fights being so consistently entertaining is certainly no accident, as his endless pressure all-offense style forces the opponent to deal with him at all times. Ribovics is a bully, and if his opponent doesn't stand up to him, he'll push them right back into the cage and pin them there all night. He's so determined to keep moving forward that he pretty much forces a banger unless the opponent decides to duck under his punches and try to take him down, but he's improved his takedown defense considerably, as shown by Elves Brener failing on all 9 takedown attempts. Ribovics is mostly a head puncher, but he does a really nice job of throwing endless combos from both stances. He's very fast and athletic, with more than a slight wild side. Offense is his game, and he likes to fight in the pocket, working short-range boxing combos. Ribovics' reach is lacking, giving up 3.5 inches to Brener despite both being 5'10", so he has to work a little harder to stay in punching range, but he has great conditioning, and ultimately it's a lot more tiring for his opponent to keep having to move backwards or sideways than for him to keep coming forward. One of his flaws is that he leaves his chin exposed a lot, especially when he's preparing to unleash his latest vicious combo, which results in him having a lot of competitive bangers. He's certainly a fighter who will take shots in order to dictate position. His offense works a lot better when he finishes with a kick because his punches often come up just short, but switching to the longer appendage makes it much more difficult for the opponent to keep backing out of range. We can debate whether Ribovics is the most exciting fighter in the lightweight division, but he's certainly the fighter whose style is most responsible for producing exciting fights because it's just go-go, all pressure, all offensive combos with no interest in locking up. Because Ribovics was able to dictate consistently, most of this fight took place in the pocket, with both fighters repeatedly nailing each other with big shots their opponent didn't have much time to try to defend. Ribovics is a terrible matchup for Brener, whose goal is to get his opponent against the cage and work his way into the grappling. Ribovics' back was rarely within 15 feet of the cage, and Brener couldn't get any conventional or timing-based takedown either. Brener relies heavily upon his power in the pocket, but even though he has a couple of knockouts in the UFC, that's not where he wants to be, especially long-term. Ribovics is definitely the better technical fighter. He's also the better athlete, and he just had too much speed and fluidity to his stance switches and punch combos for Brener, even though Brener knew what he was going to do. Brener can normally swing big enough with his overhands to make his opponent think twice, but when Ribovics held up to his power without being intimidated, he was slightly at a loss. His takedowns were most likely the strategy, but trying to use his opponent's forward motion against them is a lot more reactive strategy to getting the fight to the ground than he prefers. Brener was able to move well enough and assert enough offense to merely stay off his back foot in the second half of the fight, but Ribovics still wouldn't give him space or respect his power. Ribovics is always happy to stand and trade, and tonight Brener was largely just stuck playing Ribovics' game. In the first round of this August 2nd, 2025 UFC on ESPN 71 Taira vs. Park match, Ribovics' pressure was really just too much for Brener. Brener didn't seem that well prepared for what Ribovics was going to do. He was stuck on his back foot way too often, or stuck fighting with his back against the octagon, trying to then move laterally so he wasn't totally trapped. Ribovics was both the more active fighter and the fighter that refused to give ground when his opponent threw. The combination of being fully committed to pressure and being the bigger and more aggressive fighter was simply overwhelming Brener. Ribovics had one big flurry after Brener slipped, missing a spinning back fist, but otherwise he was more a step ahead of Brener than really going off. As the fight progressed, Brener had to force himself to either hold his ground or angle off as Ribovics was stepping forward for his next attack and try to nail him with the counterpunch. There's no downside to Ribovics' style for the fans, but the issue with always coming forward as he moves up and starts facing ranked competition is going to be that they will focus on timing his entry and be more adept at hitting him with a big shot as he's coming in. Although Brener may not have even won a round, if he was better prepared to angle off and counter from the outset, he might have actually scored the upset. The salvation for Brener is he knew he was going to be able to get his hard shots in, as Ribovics doesn't keep his guard up. Ribovics is the more skilled and active combination striker, while Brener is more reliant on doing damage with one big shot. Brener was getting solid jabs in though as well, and was definitely the more accurate fighter. Brener landed 47%, and ultimately only connected with 4 less strikes because Ribovics just refused to dignify much of what Brener was doing, and stuck to trying to overwhelm him. Brener had to start hitting harder in the second to command Ribovics' respect. Ribovics would have a longer career if he figured out a way to refuse to give ground beyond just walking through his opponent's punches. Right now, he just tried to punish Brener more in order to still dictate. Brener did a much better job of holding his ground in the final 2 rounds, and the intensity grew as the battle for octagon positioning became more of a two-way battle. It got really good when both guys were landing heavy hands while trying not to give an inch backwards. Brener was growing more and more effective as he started moving laterally and firing back before Ribovics could close the distance with a more aggressive strike. You could make the argument that Brener won the 2nd round. Ribovics never slowed down and still just had too much activity for Brener in the 3rd. Brener's accuracy dropped from over 50% in each of the first 2 rounds to just 36% on higher volume in the 3rd. This was surprising because it didn't feel like he was fading, and it seemed like he maintained the adjustments he made in the 2nd round to counterpunch as Ribovics was coming forward. Ribovics' straights were just too solid though. Brener had success when he went to the body, but both fighters were basically headhunters, landing at least 70% to that region. There were huge shots back and forth throughout the final round, and if Brener's percentage dropped, it felt like it was because he was trying to put more on his shots because there was a decent chance he needed the finish. Brener landed some massive hooks in the 3rd. This may not have started out as a slugfest, but it certainly turned into one. Both fighters' chins somehow held up, so Ribovics won via decision 29-28, 30-27, 30-27. This was a much more technical fight than the other fight of the night from UFC on ESPN 71, Chris Duncan vs. Mateusz Rebecki, while also having more activity. The only real downside of this fight is it didn't have any truly defining moments, no knockdowns or near finishes. While Ribovics vs. Brener may not have had the highest highs, there were no lows, as it was constant action from start to finish. Duncan vs. Rebecki had more drama and felt like a closer fight on the scorecards, even though both were unanimous decisions. I could see the argument for Duncan vs. Rebecki being better, as it just bleed old school brawl, but Ribovics is the fighter of these 4 with the most talent and upside, and his consistency in this fight generated the most excitement for me because it's fascinating to see him pull off his unwavering brand of all-out aggression. He was flowing here and asserting himself at all times, rather than hoping to create one big opening. Brener won his first 3 UFC fights with 2 performance bonuses, but now has lost 3 in a row. Ribovics is just better, but Brener is definitely someone UFC should keep around because he's also a very entertaining fighter. Hopefully the high quality of this fight gets him another chance against a more beatable opponent. Very good match.